Two kingdoms, Fantasy Alliance and Factory Union, have been at war for many years on the continent of Atlan, but now, in the enchanted city of Ram, the kings decide that the marriage of Alexis and Marin is the best way to put an end to the conflict and promote nation peace. Everything seems perfect, but just when the bride and groom walk down the aisle, strong dark energy surrounds the chaos convergence. Siluka, a young mage, notices the negative energy. She leaps over the walkway and runs towards the chaos globe to disperse the chaos. She immediately gets stopped by a former Marin Chamberlain, Irvin. Suddenly, dark energy spreads around the Grand Hall and the Demon Lord of Diabolos appears out of nowhere. The Demon Lord has built the dimensional barrier around the chaos convergence, which seems impossible to breach. To ensure their continued peace, the kings of both kingdoms attempt to break the dimensional barrier using their Grancrests. However, this provokes the wrath of the Demon Lord, who instead destroys both crests and kills the kings. Demon Lord disappears and Grand Hall tragedy shatters the peace and raises the flames of war once again across the entire continent. Following the Grand Hall tragedy, Siluka is sent, despite her reluctance, to establish a contract with a noble Lewd Alliance lord named Viller since the mage and master contract is obligatory. Irvin, who abandoned his post to halt Siluka at the Grand Hall disaster, is accompanying her as repentance. As they travel, they are detained by Union troops dispatched by Lord Mesto because she intends to sign a contract with the lord of a rival nation. Siluka exits the carriage and approaches the soldiers from the front. Theo, an independent lord, interrupts them at that very time. Soldiers' leader shows the intention to take Theo's crest, but Theo fights them off while displaying his incredible swordsmanship skills. He quickly dislodges a few troops, forcing the rest of them to retreat. After the fight, Siluka introduces herself and Theo expresses his ambition to one day attain the court rank, a level high enough to save his hometown of Sistina from the havoc caused by its evil lord. Siluka takes the first action and forges a shadow beast with a chaos core to aid Theo in achieving his ambition. Theo, who is now unranked, will eventually achieve the knight rank and be able to take the first step toward achieving his dream. Theo draws his sword and engages the two-headed beast in combat. He ultimately subdues the beast and takes the chaos core from him. After being impressed, Siluka, instead of making the contract with the Earl of Artuk, makes a contract with Theo, designating him as her lord. Then they proceed to Lord Mesto's castle and demand that he hand over the castle and his post. Mesto protests, but his contract master disowns him for assaulting Siluka and breaking the agreement's terms by sending soldiers to seize Siluka while she was not even in a contract with the opposing realm's lord. Hearing everything, Mesto becomes enraged and prepares to strike Siluka with his sword, but Theo steps forward to stop him. Mesto loses and is forced to give Theo his crest. When Theo takes over as lord, Siluka intends to get him to join the Union rather than the Alliance. When the neighboring lord of Savas territory, Lassic, learns of Theo's rule and his intention to join the Union, he makes the decision to invade Theo and take his castle. Knowing Lassic's offensive strategy, Siluka uses a shadow spell to call her cat familiar, Sir Balgary, and sends him to call her old friend for help. Later, while Siluka is with Theo, he asks her why she gets into a contract with him. The real motivation, according to Siluka, is to enter into a contract with a lord who, like the fabled First Lord Leon, can complete the Emperor Holy Seal and bring order back to this world while lacking crest and power lust. After a while, Lassic and his army arrive to usurp Theo's crown. Meanwhile, Sir Balgary arrives with Siluka's artist friend Aishela. As Lassic's warriors approach Theo's castle, Siluka commands Aishela to head to the right, Irvin to the center, and she chooses to turn left, leaving Theo behind to be guarded by the castle guards. As the troops approach from the left, Siluka uses a spell to create a mountain range around them. She conjures thunder, attacking the warriors until they are finally defeated. She is attacked shortly after by Moreno, a mage in contract with Lassic. As Moreno points his sword towards Siluka, she dodges Moreno's quick blow and launches a tougher counterattack. On the right side of the battlefield, Aishela is inflicting pain on the opponent with her hammer. Under the leadership of Nicola, soldiers decide to withdraw, but Aishela advances and attacks Nicola with her hammer. Fortunately, he escapes unharmed. In the center, Irvin is ruthlessly dispatching enemies with sharp blades. Lassic can't take it anymore and commands Captain Gluck of his army to fight him. Gluck quickly takes a new form and begins to batter Iris with several blows, but he deflects each one. Iris then uses a sharp knife to stab Gluck in the eye, forcing him to give up. While everything is going on, Siluka is struggling to battle Moreno, but she soon receives help from Theo, who then decides to fight in Siluka's place. Sharp sword strikes are exchanged by Theo and Moreno, but Theo's is superior. After seeing Gluck falls, Lassic resolves to take on Irvin by himself. Before Lassic begins to fight, Theo makes an appearance holding Moreno captive and orders Lassic to give up. Lassic happily surrenders and presents Theo with his crest. He gives up since he has no desire to rule as emperor. Instead, he just wants to utilize Theo's assistance to conquer his neighboring territories. Theo takes the crest and gains the court rank of Baron. The priestess, Priscilla Farnes from the Order of Crest, arrives at Theo's castle with her followers and requests to join Theo in his divine battle to subdue the chaos. However, Seleucus is annoyed by the pawn of the religious sect and tries to prevent them from joining. But Theo, on the other hand, thinks they have followers and can heal wounds and illness, which can help his men, allowing them to stay in the castle. While having dinner with Theo and Seleucus, Lassic and Moreno are motivated to conquer the western Savus. Seleucus reveals Theo's goal is not to expand his territories. She tells them Theo is from Sistina land and is striving to defeat Sistina's Lord Viscount Rossini to save his people. Seleucus suggests Theo to take the family name of hero of Sistina called Cornero as he has become a baron. After Theo agrees to Seleucus' suggestion, she asks Moreno to negotiate with the king of Savus to recognize Theo's independence, so they can move a step forward to save Sistina. Later, Irvin informs Seleucus and Theo that a chaos disaster has occurred in the castle town. As they rush to the town, it is revealed that a coal exploded and severely injured an old man. Suddenly, a demon called Salamander emerges from the fire. Aeschyla deals with Salamander, while Theo helps the townspeople to evacuate and Priscilla saves the old man by casting a crest on him. Meanwhile, leaving the old man to Priscilla, Seleucus attacks the demon with a powerful water spell and defeats him instantly. The following day, Moreno returns and informs them that the king of Savus has challenged Theo to a battle and refuses to accept his independence. Theo sends messages to the free lords and asks them to ally with him. However, the miners whom Theo saved offer to join his armies. Theo empowers his warriors by projecting his battle flag with his crest. When the battle starts, Theo's forces somehow fight neck to neck against Savus's large force. But as the reinforcement arrives, the king of Savus has to flee, resulting in Theo's victory. Later, Seleucus meets her adoptive father Aubus and the leader of the Factory Alliance to offer Theo's support for the alliance. Marin wants Theo to join the alliance, but Aubus warns her because if she makes an alliance with a lord who frequently switches sides as he announced to be with Union first, her reputation and alliance may be affected. Moreover, he tells Seleucus that their request for alliance is denied, and they will send help to the king of Savus if Theo's forces do not retreat. However, Seleucus is not afraid of their power and accepts their challenge to the battle. Seleucus then goes to the Earl of Artuc named Viller Constance, but the Earl refuses to meet her. However, she meets her senior Margaret and requests reinforcement, but it also does not go well there. Later that night, Seleucus discusses their battle tactics with Theo and others, knowing the Margrave of Valdrand and the King of Savus will be attacking with 20,000 troops, and they have 3,000 to defend their castle. She appoints Lassic, Aeschyla, and Miman to defend different entry gates to the castle. As the battle starts, Aeschyla and Gluck try to defend the centered gate, but due to a large number of troops attacking them, Aeschyla gets severely injured. However, Priscilla saves her with her powers. On the other hand, a soldier returns to Theo and informs him that Naaman has been killed in action and Lassic is retreating. Meanwhile, the king of Savus chases Lassic while he is retreating. However, after reaching a steep path where only one person can walk at a time, Lassic forces counterattack. With Gluck and Irvin's help, Lassic defeats the army and kills the king. The following day, when Marin attacks Theo, the Earl of Artuc's troops arrive at the battlefield and force Marin to leave. After the fight, Theo gives the crown of Savus to Lassic to serve as a knight under Viller, as thanks in exchange that Seleucus continues to serve him as his mage. Viller takes Theo and Seleucus with him to his castle. Later, Margaret invites Theo and Seleucus to dinner as they are having a special guest, the Prince of Continent Dartania named Lord Milza. As Milza and Theo interact at the dining table, Milza is angry at Theo for giving up his Viscount ranking for Seleucus, but is surprised that Lassic is holding Theo's Count rank. Afterwards, Viller orders Seleucus and Theo to head to the Forest of Eternal Darkness, a territory ruled by vampires. Meanwhile, in the forest, some werewolves' queen and his followers were attacked by a black witch called Yana. Theo and Seleucus arrive at the forest. They come to know that the queen of werewolves and her 2 daughters were kidnapped. When Theo and Seleucus go to save them, they fight with Yana, and after a fierce fight, they successfully defeat Yana and free the queen. As Margaret turns 25, Viller breaks his contracts with her, because he always breaks the contracts of his female mages when they become 25. He throws a party for her, and they dance for the last time together. Following the dance, Prince Milza of Dartania and Theo engage in a sparring battle on the balcony. Theo is able to save off Lord Milza's attacks for the first few moves, but he eventually falls to the ground, admits defeat, and thanks Milza for the lesson. After the party, Lord Viller and his army begin their trip to the Union Lords' Assembly. He decides to capture the Alliance's territories that will be passing through. To complete this task, Milza goes to one of the castles and kills all the lords present, receiving several crests. He asks Nicola to witness these activities and inform Alliance about the massacre. Theo, as a representative knight serving under the Earl of Artuk, goes to conquer Clovis town and meets its independent lord, Ladvin, to have some agreement. In favor of joining the Union, Theo asks him to reject the notion of joining the Alliance. After observing the trust and affection that people have for their lord, Theo decides to resolve the disagreement outside of the city, not to hurt the town people. Ladvin witnesses Theo's actual lord values and chooses to place a higher emphasis on his people's trust than on demonstrating his allegiance to the Alliance. He announces joining Union and pledges to serve Theo as a great lord. In Forbes, Lassic and the Lord of Forbes are engaged in a one-on-one sword battle. After delivering Forbes' lord many thrilling sword strikes, he plunges his sword deep into his heart, killing him instantly. And in this manner, both Forbes and Clovis have been subdued. When Marin learns of Union's triumph, she becomes anxious about the situation. During the Union Lords Congress, Viller meets with Lord Alexis, Marquis of Jalusia. Alexis extends a warm welcome to everyone and expresses a strong wish to meet with Theo personally. Viller then brings Theo to Federico Rossini, the Lord of Sistina. Theo embraces him and tells him that he hopes to return to his hometown someday. Once the Union Lords Congress is over, Alexis sneaks to Theo's castle for a talk. He tells Theo that he always loved Marin and wanted to connect with Alliance, but it never happened. He still wants to unite with Marin and bring the entire continent on one page. Theo willingly volunteers to help him achieve this task. As Alexis is leaving, they are attacked by some random people. Luna immediately transforms into a wolf and attacks intruders to rip them apart and save Theo and Alexis. Theo strikes back as well with his sword. They quickly discover that the assailants have Rossini's flag on them. Attackers keep coming and Saluka also joins the battle, but just before the enemy's blade is about to strike her, Balberry intervenes. When the fight is over, all of the attackers are dead. Alexis departs and Theo and Saluka think that the attackers were after Theo, and that the Rossini clan will be exiled from Union due to his actions. Theo and Saluka open up entirely about Federico Rossini's most recent attack, and Alexis wish to unite with Marin again. Lord Viller tells them how Alexis and Marin met and fell in love despite coming from rival families of Alliance and Union. At the Congress following Federico Rossini's expulsion from the Union, Lord Viller receives support to lead the Union, but he denies it and instead gives the endorsement to Lord Alexis. After seizing Sevis, Forbes, and Clovis, the Union tries to make peace with the Alliance, but Marin rejects their efforts and orders her men to get ready to assault Stark. As instructed by Lord Viller, with Saluka at his side, Theo sets off on a journey of his domain. While traveling, as it starts to rain, they seek shelter in a cave. Inside the cave, Theo confesses his love for Saluka and his desire to be with her forever. Waldron's men and Alliance's forces are engaged in fierce combat on the battlefield. While the Waldron force is struggling to defeat Alliance, the Black Prince of Dartania arrives like a wave of shadow and starts destroying the Alliance forces. Lady Marin is there on the battlefield and observes Mills' strategies. After the battle, Marin decides to use unethical methods to subjugate the Union, fully knowing of the repercussions of breaking the Lord's code. By utilizing miasma, the killer wind brings down Lord Pavel Murado's castle. As planned before invading Union, Marin contacts Milza and urges him to join the Alliance. Because Milza now sees Lord Viller as a weak pawn, he chooses to oppose Union, but he demands that Marin will be his conquest for the night. Marin decides to sleep with him and presents herself to Milza because she understands that the only way to defeat Artuk is to gain control of Dartania. As Lady Marin prepares to assault Union with her troops, she finds that Prince Milza's father passed away last night, and that he has now ascended to the throne of Dartania. The Forest of Eternal Darkness gets ready for the arrival of Waldron's soldiers, and Lord Viller strategizes with his lords about Waldron's upcoming movements. That he turns to his brothers, Lord Selj of Regalia and King Solon of Kilhis, requesting their assistance. He also commands Lassic to assault Ozerl and requests Lady Eudokia of Haman's floating stronghold. In order to defeat the enemy in the forest, Viller sends orders for Theo to join Boltovan's soldiers there. In the meantime, Margaret shows up at Alturk and informs Lord Viller about Mills's betrayal of the Alliance and how he came to rule by assassinating his father, Wayne protested. That supports his suspicions as Dartanian naval force arrive at Alturk. Milza may have destroyed an Artuk naval fleet, but his leading fleet is wiped out by a mirror that uses a mage's abilities to produce death rays. With the rest of his fleet, he chases the remaining members of the Artuk fleet, but is confronted by Lady Eudokia's ship and a bombardment from the coastline. Milza orders his forces to board small boats and head for the coast as he attempts to bring the battle to shore, appearing defeated. Lord Regalia, who has gone to help his dear brother Villar for assistance after getting defeated by the enemy, flees with his contracted magician and hides to await the arrival of King Solon's support. When King Solon comes, the Alliance warriors struggle under his fighting spirit. Long-lasting in the fight, King Solon eventually loses and passes away bravely on the front lines. Artuk succeeds in repelling the invading army despite incurring huge deaths. When a massive fleet of naval ships that Marin had requested sailed at them from Nord, the Union's defeats became visible. Nordic ships launch an assault on Lady Eudokia's palace at sea and cause destruction. The palace of Lady Eudokia eventually collapses and is turned into ashes. In full force, Lady Marin advances on the Union's unicorn castle of Villar with the help of Nordic and Mills's armies. Together, Margaret and Villar struggle to withstand Marin for as long as they can. Margaret, who has used her last and greatest spell, greatly weakens Marin's troops but ultimately dies. Villar is the only person remaining standing alone against Marin, and thus Marin gives the order to fire in his direction. Villar successfully halts the onslaught, but it leaves him severely injured. After stopping the second assault, Marin approaches her cousin Villar one final time. Villar dies for the sake of Union and wishes Marin a good life. After Marin assumes control of the Unicorn Castle, Milza receives the castle and the Villar crest. Now that Milza is in charge, he must conquer Artuk. After Villar's death, Milza engages in a fight with an Altric lord who refuses to bow to him and kills him in the battle. Assembling in Lasic's castle, Lords decides to create the Artuk Treaty to honor the late Villar. Lords decide to pick the leader after observing that they currently lack one. All concur that Lassic should be their next leader, but Lassic suggests Theo. Lassic takes over until the battle is over because Theo receives no votes from the other lords. Meanwhile, Marin sees Theo and Seluca and expresses her desire to take back Boltava from Theo. Theo, after refusing to surrender Boltava, reminds Marin of the love that ever existed between her and Alexis. Theo has one notion of turning the Grand Hall tragedy into a miracle and reuniting Marin and Alexis. Later, Theo learns that Marin has retreated from Boltava after suffering a few setbacks in the surrounding areas. Now that Waldland has withdrawn, the major battleground will probably shift to the north, so Seluca and Theo decide to march to Sistina. In order to unite Marin and Alexis, Seluca feels that now is the ideal time to overthrow Rossini's family. Theo and his companions reach Sistina and come across Yana and Salvador Rossini, one of the Rossini family members. Theo challenges Salvador that he will take Sistina's charge from Rossini to save his people. Later, Theo contacts the residents of Sistina and asks for their assistance in overthrowing Rossini, but because of Rossini, they are frightened enough to side with Theo. When no one stands up for Theo, he marches to Marza, his hometown. There, Theo runs into Rebecca, an old friend. Rebecca gathers people as Theo seeks out local residents to speak with. The people of Marza respect Theo's motivations but view them feeble and refuse to assist him. Theo chooses to quit the pace since he sees no hope, but before they leave, Theo and Rebecca go to visit his father's grave. At the grave, Theo is attacked by Salvador Rossini and his men. Soon, Rebecca, who had persuaded the village people to oppose Rossini, comes to his assistance. When Rossini realizes he has lost, he tries to flee, but Rebecca stops him. In his struggle to run away, Rossini attacks Rebecca and severely injures her. Theo is heartbroken to see his old friend in such a bad injury, so he attacks Rossini in full rage and eventually kills him. The allegation that Theo had murdered Salvador Rossini, the third son of the Rossini family, quickly circulated throughout Sistina. In several locations, there is a rebellion, and under Theo, people band together to join the revolt. Federico, whose son was slain, gives his eldest son Doni the task of recruiting 5,000 men to assassinate Theo. Doni's army approaches Theo's soldiers on the battlefield while the assassin Bolts and Black Witch Yana silently infiltrate the fight. Irvin and the twins decide to deal with them and engage Bolts and Yana in a separate altercation. Bolts loses his life during the battle with Irvin, but Yana is able to flee the twins' onslaught. Theo and everyone else on the field fight for Sistina's freedom. The amazing swordsmanship by Theo allows him to defeat Doni and take control of Sistina. Yana appears out of nowhere and attempts to murder Theo, but Seluca counterattacks and orders Aishella to capture her. To seize Rossini's castle, Theo advances with his troops. Rossini surrenders and offers to obey Theo for Sistina's prosperity. Theo wins the title of Earl and is acknowledged by the Mage Academy as the ruler of Sistina and Boltava for defeating the Rossini family and capturing the Black Witch. Yana is in custody and has sentenced the living to death. She calls the Demon Lord and gives him her soul just before she passes away. Later, Theo is informed that Milza had destroyed the werewolf and white witch communities. Theo returns to Artuk, and at the Lord Conference plans to topple Milza and retake the Forest of Eternal Darkness. With everything planned, Milza's army faces an eternal defeat in the werewolf and white witch villages. Milza eventually makes it to the castle in the forest of eternal darkness and challenges Theo, has already proclaimed the fortress to be taken. While Milza demonstrates his intentions to beat Theo, Theo's army prepares for the brutal battle that lies ahead. Later, to seduce Theo away, Milza commands his forces to attack Regalia. Theo does not fall for the trap and avails the opportunity to take back Castle Unicorn. Meanwhile, Ulrika, the head of the Nordic fleet, appears to have lost the battle when Lady Eudokia successfully provokes rebellion among the Stark slave warriors by stripping off her clothes and her soldiers. Milza is on the verge of losing the battle and is waiting for his allies to come for his help. Milza rushes out of the Unicorn Castle with his troops and charges an attack on Theo's army since he can't lose his pride by waiting for backup. Milza marches toward Theo in an effort to defeat him, but he is forced to engage in combat with Baron Jorgo, the Theater King Solon's son. Milza eventually makes it to Theo's base, where he comes across Siluka's military strategies. Aeshela assaults Milza first, followed by the twins Irvis and Siluka. However, Milza successfully repels all of the attacks. He moves closer to Siluka in order to ultimately kill her, but Theo intervenes and saves her. Milza and Theo are engaged in a one-on-one battle, and Milza is attempting to dominate Theo by using his sword and full might. Theo counterattacks and quickly stops attacking and focuses entirely on defending himself from Milza's onslaught. Milza becomes exhausted and is provoked by Theo for losing his crest's power. Milza's army has given up, and he has also lost his sword in his battle with Theo. Theo kills him and gets Villar's crest back for Artuk's honor. Marin, who is on her way to rescue Milza, learns of Theo's heroic victory and Milza's death. She withdraws and makes preparations to finish the Earl of Lacouleurs. After getting the leadership of the Artuk Treaty, Theo announces their separation from the Union in an effort to achieve a balance between them and the Alliance. However, they will continue to work with the Union. Following a brief celebration, Theo secretly asks Siluka to be his queen when he returns to his nation. Siluka agrees but requests him not to announce it for now. Marin learns that Theo has taken over as the treaty's leader. She then decides to deal with the Earl of Lacouleurs right away. The following day, when Priscilla says she is the Holy Grail, Siluka tells her about Pope Leon's announcement that he is the Holy Grail. Siluka forewarns her that the Pope, who shares her goals, could have plans to take Theo and her crests. Later, Irvin reports that Waldron's men had defeated the Earl of Lacouleurs, in part because of the defection of mercenaries supplied by Lord Dawson. The only thing they could do was adapt and start traveling to the Union region of Jalucia to cheer up Alexis and persuade him to strike a military balance between them and the Alliance. At first reluctant, Alexis ultimately decides to attack Lord Dawson and step into the battle for Marin's sake. As Dawson's defeat becomes clear, he is forced to give up. When Marin learns of Dawson's defeat, she is greatly shocked and even breaks down when she hears of Alexis stepping onto the battlefield. She immediately appeals to the Nords for assistance, and they engage Alexis' naval troops in a bloody sea battle that ends with Eric the Sea King's death and Alexis winning his crest. Nords are now out of the page, and the Union, Alliance, and Treaty troops are evenly balanced. The Union and the Alliance were to make peace in accordance with the treaty, but Marin rejected this and insisted on destroying the Union and the treaty. A three-way deadlock is undesirable for everyone involved since, in Siluka's opinion, it would only benefit their real enemy, the one responsible for the Great Hall tragedy. Later, Marin summons every Alliance lord to prepare for the impending war with the Union and the treaty. Alliance is set to a battle with treaty and is organizing its forces in accordance with the attack plan. The battle begins with arrows and blood flying everywhere in the field. When the fight meets the deadlock, Theo requests a conference on the behalf of treaty with the Union and Alliance. Theo proves to everyone that the Great Hall tragedy was the work of the Mage Academy. Marin initially shows reluctance in uniting with Alexis and creating Grancrest against Mage Academy, but she soon agrees with Theo as their new emperor and support. Siluka has been informed that when Mage Academy knows about the crowing of the new emperor and the creation of Grancrest, it carries out a large-scale purge in Aram against mages supporting lords. The newly formed Imperial Army, Union, Alliance, and Treaty under Emperor Theo set for Aram. Mages break their wands to void their connection with Mage Academy and not to get tracked. One night before marching to Aram, Aeshela reveals she had been working for Mage Academy's secret organization, Pandora, for the whole time. Aeshela is ordered to kill Siluka and Theo, but when she voluntarily refuses the orders, Pandora's sign on her breast begins to stop her heart. Priscilla steps in and successfully treats Aeshela. While Theo's Imperial Army is now en route to Aram, the Order of Crest has declared a holy war against the Imperial Army. Priscilla believes her duty as the Holy Maiden is to talk with the Pope and resolve the dispute. She visits Pope and delivers a talk about letting go of the concept of war. Two agents of Pandora near Pope make him kill Priscilla. Priscilla's crest does not turn into the Chaos Core, making Pope realize that Priscilla was the true Holy Maiden, and he regrets murdering her. When Pope denies taking Priscilla's crest, one of the members of Pandora tries to kill him, but she gets stopped by Irvin. Pandora's member runs away, and Theo is informed of Priscilla's death. Theo immediately approaches them and takes custody of Priscilla's crest. He carries Priscilla's body and departs, wanting to put a stop to the chaos in the world. Using a sealed Cyclops, the Order of Crest tries to halt the Imperial Army's march. The Vlasic and his allies manage to take it down with a concerted onslaught. As darkness falls, the siege of Aram starts and is quickly accomplished. As a result of the break-in of Aram's outer defenses, the Order of Crest now intends to murder Theo. The Imperial Army gets ready to enter the city, and the Forest of Eternal Darkness shows certain alterations that appear to be an invitation from Vampire King Dimitri to Theo. Theo and his friends follow the invitation to the Vampire King's castle to meet him. Soon after Aeon arrives, Luna's brother delivers the true Vampire King's body, revealing that the body they had been talking with is just the shadow he had created himself. After the Vampire King is killed by Aeon, the Vampire King and Theo's allies engage in a fierce battle. Just as Theo's side appears to be losing, Theo uses Priscilla's light to overpower the Vampire King. However, Aeon pays the price with his life. After slaying the Vampire King, Theo and his comrades travel to Aram to discover the connection between Order of Crest and Pandora. He visits the Grand Hall and speaks with the Chaos Globe Custodian in order to learn the cause of the Grand Hall tragedy and the motivation behind the attempt to halt the development of Grancrest. When Theo touches the Chaos Globe, Pandora appears within and issues a warning not to put an end to the Chaos Age for fear of destroying yet another civilization. When Theo insists on ending the period of chaos, the custodian of the Chaos Glove kills himself and passes away there. Theo then assumes the role of emperor, dividing the continent by forming the new Empire of Leon, with Aram serving as its capital. 3 years later, Alexis and Marin, Theo and Seleuca marry at the Grand Hall, turning the tragedy that had occurred there into a miracle. Theo creates Grancrest and eradicates the Age of Chaos from the land. Birth of Grancrest brings an end to Crests and Mages' magic. It also results in Sir Baldri's disappearance. And so the chaos that had overrun the continent was purged, and at last, peace came to the world momentarily. Theo ducks the crown to Alexis and moves back to his hometown Selena to rule it. In order to bring happiness to his hometown, he has changed the world.